Realm presents Royally Yours, Episode 3.
Tracy. Just perfect. What should have been her triumphant fashion reboot was now quickly looking like the end of her career, Tracy Lewis thought, as she stared into the furious eyes of the usually poised Princess Grace, Duchess of Dorset, third cousin of the soon-to-be-wed Prince Richard of Wales. Princess Grace, or Gracie as she was commonly called, was downright fuming. Her wide blue eyes shooting daggers, her cheeks shot with bright spots of red fire, while her normally smooth, soft ginger hair seemed to take on a life of its own, frizzing up and growing wilder and larger with every wave and exaggerated flourish of the hat she held in her hand. Tracy focused on the princess. What could have gone wrong? The hat was perfectly fine when she delivered it yesterday. As a matter of fact, when the princess had tried on her mock-up for fitting the month before in New York, she had loved it, commenting that most other things she'd tried looked like piles of poop on her head. As Tracy took in Princess Gracie's fit of temper, she tried her best not to flinch. Not in fear, mind you. As a custom hat designer, she'd come across far more formidable clients over the years. One developed a thick skin when it came to designing for the stylish and always on the edge of fashion Harlem church set. But right now, she was more afraid for her poor creation. Though she was confident in its construction, one still didn't jangle around a one-of-a-kind, delicately sculpted, totally hand-beaded cloche. The design was perfection. The way it dipped low and swooped sassily around one ear, but rose higher on the other. The hat also bore the intricate architectural design elements that were Tracy's signature. Watching the princess wave it around was just about giving Tracy a twitch. Even if she was dealing with a royal, she wanted to snatch it out of the princess's hand. "Jasmine, my phone!" Goodness. Gracie was out yapping the corgis down the hall. Tracy stood still, trying her best to hide her embarrassment. She never imagined a scene like this would be played out before her eyes in the gorgeous green drawing room in the East Wing of Buckingham Palace. The maid, who had just entered carrying a tea tray, only nodded, all calmness with a serene smile, though she had done nothing to deserve the princess's harsh tone. She put the tray down and went the few steps over to the nearby sideboard and retrieved the cell phone, handing it to Gracie with a quick curtsy. "If that will be all, Your Grace, I must go and tend the wedding flowers now, ma'am." The sweet girl's soft tone brought the princess up short for a moment, and she gave a nod and a small smile that seemed to hold an apology for her outburst, before turning back to Tracy, her cell phone now in her other hand. Tracy was about to reach out and rescue her hat when Princess Gracie pushed her cell forward. "How am I supposed to wear this to the wedding tomorrow when this has been leaked to the press?" Her voice and her hands were vibrating. Tracy's head bobbed as she tried to focus on the small screen. "Your Grace, please," she said with as much calm as she could muster. Gracie took a breath and stilled her hands, swiping the screen and bringing it closer for Tracy to view. Tracy opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her dream of finally making it on the international fashion scene seemed to vanish before her eyes as she gazed at the photo on the princess's phone. There before her was a picture of Princess Georgina, twin sister of Princess Grace, and, at least in the press, chief rival to her sister in every way. The photo was a grainy paparazzo shot of Georgina trying on a hat that looked almost identical to the one Tracy had designed for Princess Grace. The caption of the photo read, "Exclusive preview! Thanks to eagle-eyed paparazzo Gwen Parker, we have a sneak peek of what the always fashion-forward Princess Georgina will be wearing to tomorrow's royal nuptials. Here she is doing a private fitting in the studio with Master Milliner Finley Nye." Freaking Finley Nye. Tracy felt her blood begin to boil. How could this be happening? How could her ambitions once again come to a crashing halt because of that piece of trash Finley Nye? This was supposed to be her big breakthrough. It was the reason she was back in London from New York in the first place, to hand-deliver the wedding day hat to the princess herself. The world would be watching the wedding between the most eligible Brit and the American commoner tomorrow. As if being a multi-million-dollar recording star made you a commoner, but that was another story altogether. In the eyes of royal watchers everywhere, she was a commoner. And to top things off, she was African-American. Tracy, being a black girl from Harlem, could not help the extra bit of pride she felt over that. But she couldn't think of that now. Not with Princess Grace standing before her in the midst of a royal hissy fit. The princess continued. "Why, if I wore your hat to the wedding tomorrow, I'd be the royal laughingstock. Poor Gracie, they would say. Can she ever get out from under Georgie's shadow?" Tracy blinked, searching her mind for a quick answer, but mentally cursing herself when none came to her normally quick-witted brain. How could it be that Finley had made an exact replica of her hat? She'd made the entire thing back in New York and had only delivered it yesterday. At that moment, Princess Georgina, Georgie, to those who knew and loved or loathed her, strode into the salon on stiletto heels, just in time to add fuel to her sister's already blazing fire. Princess Georgina looked very much like her fraternal twin, insomuch as they were both tall and had the same creamy English complexions, thin lips, and strong angular noses. But that was where the similarities stopped. While Princess Grace had a certain softness to her, Princess Georgina was all cool and cunning beauty, a flat-ironed, iced blonde with eyes so dark they were nearly black. She was never photographed with more than a faked smile across her face. "I don't know what you're going on about, Gracie," Georgina said dryly as she stepped into the room, sounding bored. "It's not like anyone's going to be looking at you all that closely. Just wear the damned hat, or you can borrow one of my old ones. I don't know why you went with an American designer anyway. It's bad enough that we're now getting an American in the family. Do have to be all 3 cheers for the Star-Spangled Banner in your fashion choices, too." It was with that comment that Georgie's gaze raked across Tracy for the first time, giving her a slick up and down, causing Tracy's hackles to rise, and all thoughts of being in the presence of 2 princesses to blow right out of her mind. Somebody was itching to get told off. Tracy opened her mouth to do just that, when another voice chimed in from the doorway, leaving her struck momentarily dumb.
"Now, Georgie, don't be so harsh on the American. There are plenty of good things that come out of America,"
said a young man as he shot Tracy a cheeky grin, as if he were a friend she'd just hung out with down at the pub the night before, and not the man who'd broken her heart and helped derail her career 7 years ago. Damn it, she should have known. If Finley Nye was involved in this hat screw-up, then of course his not-so-trusty assistant, the devastating, in all ways, Jeremy Brooks would be too. Princess Georgie snorted in reply to Jeremy's remark, and Tracy did too. Royal class and abundance in the green drawing room today. Tracy made to turn away from Jeremy and get back to handling the situation at hand, but not before she caught what she could have sworn was a hint of warning in Jeremy's disarming blue eyes. Who the hell was he to be warning her? If anything, she'd bet $1 to a dime he'd had something to do with this whole mess. Tracy let her mind do a little around the world, to back in the day when she was a young, bright-eyed Harlem girl, fresh off the plane from New York. The exclusive internship in London with Finley Nye had been her dream opportunity. But she'd come to realise that for all his upper-crust British pomp and circumstance bull, Nye was just a hack, and a hack who was not above stealing designs, be it from other designers or from his own interns. And she'd fallen hard for Jeremy, as they'd spent long nights in the studio, propping up Finley Nye's legend with their own talents. It's a good thing she was no longer that girl. Though, looking at him now, she could still see the appeal. Still lanky in that athletic way of his, though she could see his shoulders were a bit broader, his arms more defined in that "come on and python your way around me, sir" type of way. Tracy eyed him as he spoke soothingly to both Gracie and Georgina. His face was still pretty much the same. That is, it was still pretty. English peaches and cream, but a bit weathered, hinting at a slight rough edge to counter all that loveliness. Not to mention the neatness of his impeccable trousers, crisp white shirt, and finely tailored jacket, purposely left open to show off his signature suspenders and that damned bow tie. Tracy held back a sigh. She'd seen it in many photos, and now here it was, in real life. So cheeky, hand-tied almost perfectly, but also giving the impression that with the slightest tug, it could easily come undone. Freaking Jeremy Brooks was a danger at first sight, and Tracy didn't know why she hadn't recognized it immediately, way back when. Breathe, Tracy, breathe. There had to be an explanation. Her eyes landed on Jeremy, and her rage sparked hotter. "What do you know about this?" she asked sharply.
"I'm just as shocked as you are,"
he said.
"I was floored when I got word from Georgie, so of course I ran right over to see what I could do to help."
His tone was just a little too innocent for Tracy to take at face value. It took her back to their breakup, 7 years before, and she had to fight to keep her mind on the problem at hand. "Well, my design is an original," Tracy told him emphatically. She turned to Gracie. "Your Grace, you have to believe me. I'd never steal anyone else's designs. I've had this idea for years. As a matter of fact, with your debut, I'd plan it to be the start of a whole new collection. I'm sorry, but I don't know how this happened." It was then that Princess Georgie snorted again, clearly about to say something, but Jeremy chimed in again.
"Of course it's your design, Tracy. These things happen."
Princess Georgie snorted yet again, louder. "As if. Come on, Jeremy. Why are you defending this girl? She's clearly knocked off Finley's work." Tracy raised a finely arched brow higher. "I don't need Jeremy, or anyone to defend me. I told you already, it's my design. Maybe you should ask Finley Nye what happened. Why is he not here to explain himself?" She turned Jeremy's way. Jeremy gave a slight blush.
"Well, he's currently indisposed. He would be here, but he was having a bit of a freshening up before the big day tomorrow. So, I'm here in his stead."
Tracy couldn't help her eye roll. Freaking Finley. Still Finleying after all these years. He was either having a last-minute cosmetic thing, or he was under his latest boy toy. Either way, someone else was taking the heat for his mess. "Well," Georgie said, directing her cool tone to Gracie, "my advice to you, dear sister, is to get your hairdresser on the line to see what she can do with that nest on your head, because I'm not changing a thing. I'm wearing Finley's hat. It's expected that I make a statement, and that's what I intend to do." Tracy watched the sisters stare at each other, eyes flashing, nostrils flaring, and then just as quickly as it flared up, it fizzled out. All it took was a blink and a slight slump of the shoulders from Princess Gracie, and it was done. All the energy faded from the room, along with Tracy's hopes for international acclaim. Princess Gracie turned her way. "I'm sorry, Tracy, but I can't wear your hat, lovely as it is." Then she let out a sigh. "My sister is correct. We can't wear hats that are so similar. It would cause too much of a scandal. Unless you have something else that would work, I won't be able to wear one of your designs tomorrow." Tracy wanted to fall through the floor. Of course she didn't have anything else that would work. She was in London, away from her New York showroom, to deliver that hat. And it was the day before the wedding. She also had hardly any supplies and barely any resources to make something else in such a short time frame, only bringing with her the hat and a few touch-up materials for the final fitting. It was time to admit defeat, add to her burgeoning debt, and get ready for her return trip home. Tracy shook her head. I understand, and I'm sorry this happened. No, I don't.
Of course she does.
The three women turned toward Jeremy. Tracy gave him a wide-eyed, "WTF are you doing?" look, and he gave her a wide-eyed,
"Run with me on this"
back. Tracy watched as Jeremy shifted to his smooth-talking self and sidled up to Gracie, taking her hat from the princess's hand. His long, nimble fingers grazed her arm ever so slightly as he looked deep into her eyes. Tracy didn't miss the way Gracie's breath hitched slightly. Jeremy held Tracy's hat up to the light and gently turned it around.
It really is a work of art.
The praise both warmed and infuriated Tracy. She didn't need to hear from him how good her work was. He'd let her know just how much he believed in her when he decided to let her down 7 years ago. Jeremy turned Gracie's way.
May I?
He asked. The low and gravelly way he framed the question would have any woman wondering if he were asking to place the hat on her head or to lower her panties. Either way, Gracie nodded, and Jeremy placed the hat gently on her head, then broke into that damned smile.
Now, that is a picture.
He led Gracie to the ornate mirror in the room.
You were made to wear a Tracy Lewis design. If not this one, give her until the wedding to deliver another. I'm sure it all will work out beautifully.
Once again, Gracie nodded, while Tracy considered if there was extra sentencing for killing someone on royal grounds. Maybe she should wait until they were outside the palace before harming Jeremy. There was no way she could get another hat done by tomorrow. How many of her humiliations would satisfy this man? Suddenly, Princess Big Mouth snorted once again. "Jeremy, you really are too much." Then she laughed and turned to her sister. "The hat does suit you, sister. I'll give you that." She turned to Tracy. "But I doubt you'll be able to make something to match it in less than a day." Georgie laughed, and Tracy knew then and there she might not be able to pull it off, but she would kill herself trying. "Just you watch me." She turned and took a step toward Princess Gracie. "If I may have that back, please. I'll have something new for you by morning." Gracie reached up, took off the hat, and gave it to Tracy. "Well, if you'd like to try, but I can't promise you I'll wear it if it's not up to scratch." Tracy nodded as she packed up the hat. "Of course." Princess Georgie let out a long sigh. "Well, I've now grown bored of this. Jeremy, join me for a spot of champagne before my Pilates." Jeremy shook his head.
"So sorry. No can do. I promised my gran I'd take her to have her bunions taken care of this morning. I know, it's awful. But I am a loyal grandson after all."
The princesses both pulled faces, and Tracy's brows drew together, while she tried not to laugh over Jeremy's blatant lie. She knew for sure that his grandmother was long dead. As a matter of fact, he had no family. She gave a mental shrug. Oh well, wherever he was off to was his business. She had to figure out how to fashion a new hat out of nothing but grit and desperation.
Jeremy lengthened his stride, trying to catch up to Tracy as she crossed the street, heading away from the palace, hat literally in hand. She looked beautiful. His first glimpse of her today had practically snatched his breath away. She had bloomed into the dynamic woman he always knew she would be, and it was almost too much to take. Not to mention, she was hot as hell. As he looked at her now, rushing off to God knows where, he took in the sway of her hips in her long black pencil skirt, meant to be demure with her black hose and kitten heels, but failing miserably. Her peplum jacket accented her shapely curves and, he'd bet, sent hormone levels spiking in each passerby. During their meeting, it had taken every ounce of Jeremy's strength to stay focused and not reach out to touch her smooth brown cheeks. Oh gosh, how he longed to see her smile, make her laugh, and see those glorious dimples of hers once more. Or better yet, take her into his arms and kiss her full lips until her dark eyes changed from shooting him daggers of rage to going soft with desire. But that was probably nothing more than a dream. After seeing how hurt she was by Finley's latest mess, he was sure those daggers would be there to stay. Jeremy sped up before Tracy could turn the corner and shake him off entirely by entering the underground. He reached out to grab her by the forearm, then thought better of it. He gave his best attempt at a casual smile. "You're looking wonderful, Tracy. It's been a long time. Can we talk?" Tracy stopped short, brows knitted tight. "What could we possibly have to talk about, Jeremy? As you can see," she held up the hat box, "thanks to your boss, or maybe it was you, I now have to pull a new hat out of my ass in less than 24 hours. So, old chum, I don't think we'll be playing How Have You Been? Let's stroll down memory lane." She started to step forward then, making to shift around him, and suddenly fear knotted in Jeremy's gut. He couldn't let her leave. This would all be for nothing, and everything would be ruined if she did. His hand came out before he could stop it, tightening around her forearm. "Please, let me help you." She looked at him then, surprise coming to her wide eyes, before she laughed. It was nowhere near the kind of laugh he longed to hear. It was the kind that raked at him, like nails ripping across his heart. "You help me? Now that is funny. If you'd please let me go now and stop wasting my time, I'd really appreciate it." Jeremy swallowed. "Please, Tracy." He looked around, suddenly aware of all the people on the street, the tourists crowding around the palace. He caught sight of the Hound pub and pointed at it. "Come on, just give me a few minutes in there. We can come up with a plan. At least let me try to help." Tracy's gaze went toward the pub, and her eyes softened. For a moment he saw a glimpse of the girl he knew, which gave him a lump in his throat. Be strong, Jeremy. Stay on task.
Tracy. Tracy let out a sigh then, and nodded as they ducked into the Hound. It took a moment for her to adjust to the dimness of the pub, as she took in the old English ambience. Dark wood original beams on the ceiling. She blinked when she recognized the old round tables, and had another moment of recognition when glancing at the bartender. Could he still be here too? A bit of warmth entered her chilled heart as she remembered coming here with Jeremy years ago. She gave her head a shake. Damn it. She would not waste time rehashing old thoughts of him. "I'm going to the ladies. I'll be back." She briefly thought about letting him hold her hat while she went. Hell, his boss had already copied it. What more damage could Jeremy do? But she took it with her. When she returned, she saw he already had tea, scones, and sandwiches waiting. Before him was a black coffee and an ale. "Bit early for the ale, don't you think?" she said, then immediately regretted her words. He gave her a sexy half-smile and a shrug.
Early is a relative term. It all depends on whether or not one has gone to bed yet.
He had a point there. Over the years, Jeremy had only become more and more popular with the London lady set. A player's player. He had been photographed with all the top models, royals, and anyone who made the gram look sexy. Though Tracy didn't go so far as to officially follow him on social media, she could admit to scrolling through his page a time or 10. She added 4 lumps of sugar to her tea, gave it a slow stir, and then a sip. "You have 5 minutes. I don't have time to waste." He nodded and cleared his throat.
Yes, I know. And once again, I'm sorry. But I had nothing to do with that hat.
Tracy shook her head. Save it. What are you going to do about it? Right now, I need to get to the fabric and trim stores. I have almost no supplies to work with, and I don't have my machines. I'll be working out of my hotel room, so everything will have to be done by hand. She let out a long sigh, just about ready to crawl in a corner and admit defeat. But her need to save face kept her from doing so.
I can help you,
he said. And for a moment, Tracy thought there might have been real sincerity in his tone. She gave him a glare. Yes, I'm sure you can. Help me right out of town on the Laughingstock Express. She picked up her scone and took a healthy bite, realizing how much the morning's trials had piqued her hunger. She swallowed and then added, "And why would you help me anyway? Your boss has clearly decided to take me down. Tell me, has Finlay sent out minions like you to sabotage poor little up-and-comers all over town in anticipation of the big day tomorrow? Has he gotten so desperate as to stoop low enough for that?" Jeremy reached out his hand and put it over hers. The intimate touch shocked her with its charge.
Tracy, you've got it all wrong. Finlay didn't send me. I'm doing this because I genuinely care about you.
Tracy flinched and snatched her hand from his grasp. Damn, you're good. So now Finlay's pimping you out to cover his tracks. She shook her head, then looked him in the eye. Not that I'm surprised, Jeremy. You are still quite handsome. But I will say, I am a little disappointed. It was then that Tracy saw something shift in his gaze. Any bit of bravado, snark, or cockiness faded away, and she saw true hurt. Had she gone too far? For a moment she thought she had, as Jeremy's eyes went cloudy, his gaze hinting at a storm of emotion beneath the surface. But instead of speaking, Jeremy picked up his beer and drained it. When he tilted his head back to meet her gaze and pushed his floppy hair out of his eyes, his stare was steely.
I do want to help. You can take it, or you can go back home to the States and accept defeat from Finlay. Again. With it being the day before the wedding, you'll be hard-pressed to find the shops with the supplies you need open. I have everything at our workshop, and plenty of tools to make what you need back at my place.
He paused.
It would seem my 5 minutes are up, so I won't waste any more of your time.
He signaled for their server, not giving Tracy time to either respond or finish her scone. Admit defeat by heading home, or admit defeat by accepting his help? Tracy picked up the scone and took another big bite, chewing rapidly. Fine, she said. There is no way I'm going down without a fight. So, I guess you're in the trenches with me. Walking, well, technically sneaking, into Finlay Nye's workshop for the first time in 7 years was just as nerve-wracking as Tracy had imagined. It was past 5 o'clock, and the shop was closed, as Jeremy had said it would be. All was quiet. During their few hours apart that afternoon, Tracy had scoured the city for an open notions shop that would allow her to fix things without Jeremy's help, but had come up empty. In the end, she popped by her hotel to change into slim black stretch pants, a V-neck and flats. Something more suitable for cat burglary. Once inside, it immediately hit Tracy how little had changed. The place was brimming with more millinery supplies than one could ever dream of, and she got the same stomach-quivering excitement she'd had as an inspired young intern. But then her thoughts turned wistful as she took in the old workstations. The cutting table, where Mr. Phillips had cut patterns with the precision of a master surgeon. The steaming station, where Craig would steam a fascinator to within an inch of its life. The beading sections, where Mrs. Cathy and Ms. Yasuaki would bead the most intricate works of art. She thought then of Mrs. Brightly, the hand sewer who could fashion a flower out of just about any type of fabric and make it look real enough to sniff. Mrs. Brightly had been a spry 80 if she was a day when Tracy had been working there, and suddenly she worried for her. As Jeremy led her father into the shop, she couldn't help but ask him, "So, it looks like nothing much has changed. Are many of the old people from my day still here?" Jeremy nodded.
It's all pretty much the same. You know how Finley is. We keep the status quo around here.
She nodded.
And Mrs. Brightly? I can't imagine she's still here. Has she retired?
His eyes clouded for the second time that day.
No, she didn't retire. She's passed away.
Oh. I'm sorry. She was sweet and so talented. I'm sure it was a blow to Finley. Tracy noticed then the tightening in Jeremy's jaw as he nodded.
Yes, to all of us. It hasn't been the same without her. It's not easy to find someone who can wield a needle with that type of skill nowadays.
Surrounded by the familiar studio, Tracy let her thoughts drift back to the day that had upended her whole career. She'd been silly, young and naive, and things had seemed to be going so well, even on the day she saw Finley going through her old sketchbook. The one that she'd known was in her backpack and not on her desk, as he'd claimed. But being young and the newbie, she'd let it slide. It wasn't until her design, the one from her sketchbook, appeared full and whole in front of her a week later, that she was unable to hold her tongue, as Jeremy had warned her to do. Well, Finley wasn't having it. He called her out in front of the entire workroom.
Who would care?
He said, if she had a sketch that looked somewhat like the hat about to head to the showroom with his label inside. The sketch was in his workroom, and she was in his employ. He owned it and her. He then lined up the staff and asked them one by one for their opinions. Every one of them agreed with him, even Mrs. Brightly, though to her credit, she did admonish him with a sigh and a, "Leave the poor dear alone, Finley," before putting her head back down to her work. But no agreement was worse than Jeremy's. That just about broke Tracy apart. Tracy shook off the memory as they entered the narrow storage closet, filled floor to ceiling with metal shelves, teeming with bins of beading, ribbons, straw, feathers, lace, pretty much any sort of hat notion you could imagine. She felt suddenly claustrophobic. What if Finley appeared right now? What if this was some sort of trap? There was a sudden loud bang from the hallway, and Tracy jumped, blurting out, "We need to go. This isn't a good idea." Jeremy whirled around, putting one arm around her waist and covering her mouth with his hand. He pulled her body flush with his and flicked off the light. The unexpected closeness shocked her, churning up immediate desire. By the way his eyes widened and the unexpected hardness she felt, she could tell he felt it too. But he shook his head.
Shh! It's just the security guard making his rounds. He'll be gone in a minute.
She shook her head back at him, then gave his hand a yank. "You didn't have to cover my mouth like that." He shrugged, and then brought his hand up again, dragging his thumb tenderly across her lips. The sensation almost made her weak in the knees.
I'm sorry about that. Now stop worrying and let's get what you need.
He paused.
I'm pretty sure he's gone.
He released her slightly, and Tracy sighed as he flicked the light back on. "How can I not worry? Not that I owe you or anything, but I still don't want to cause you any trouble with Finley. This is crazy. Let me just go and deal with this myself." He let out a breath and gently took her hand.
I understand that this is hard for you, being back here. It's hard for me bringing you here after everything that happened. I didn't say it then, but I'm sorry. You have to believe me. I was an idiot.
"Were you?" she asked, taking in his suit, finely polished shoes, and fancy watch. because it doesn't seem like the years of doing Finley's bidding have been all that hard on you. Tracy watched as Jeremy's jaw went hard.
You of all people should know not to believe everything you see when it comes to working for Finley Nye.
She saw the challenge in his eyes, not to mention the hint of regret.
Now, what would you like?
He gestured around the storeroom.
Did you decide what you were making on the way over? You don't have time to wait for a custom-sized form to dry, so you'll have to settle with a pre-done one. We have quite a few over there,
he said, pointing to a back shelf. Wait, won't Finley notice if one is missing?
Maybe, but I'll deal with that later. Giving up a form and some supplies is a small price to pay for stealing your design.
His words came as a shock to her. So, you admit he did it?
Did I ever deny it?
So then how? How could it have happened? She asked. He looked her in the eye and reached out to lightly take her fingers in his own. She let him, as if she could judge the truth of his words through his touch.
I don't know how he did it, but I suspect either he's got a friend or two in the States who are doing a bit of snooping on his behalf, or his long memory didn't fail him. You said you'd thought up the idea years ago. Is this close to something you sketched, way back when he was snooping through your old sketchbook?
Tracy gasped. Come on, could he be that conniving? To have held onto my old work in anticipation of me becoming somebody one day?
Who knows? We all always knew you'd be big, and you really made him angry calling him out that day like you did. Nobody but you had the nerve to challenge him. It was pretty awesome.
Bullshit. If that's what you thought, you would have stuck by me instead of abandoning me when I needed you. Jeremy's eyes went to the floor.
I said I admired you. I didn't say anything about being as strong as you. And come on. It looks like the years haven't been terribly rough on you either. Don't forget. You were in the palace today too, Tracy. And you didn't have to use Finley's name to get there.
Tracy let out a huff. Nice to see you're still as smart-assed as ever, Jeremy Brooks. Come on. Time is wasting. I don't know what I'm planning to make, but I might as well try to come up with something. Jeremy cracked a smile then. It wasn't one full of his usual cheekiness, but still, there was a hint of it.
That's the old American spirit. Now, where shall we start? You have to have some sort of idea.
Tracy shook her head.
Really, I don't. My heart was set on that star for Princess Gracie. It would have been perfect. You saw it on her. I did, but you were talented. So come on now, think. You know that the perfect hat does just what that design did. It indulges the wearer's desires. What does the princess desire the most?
Tracy looked at him, confused. How should I know? I'm not getting into that woman's carnal thoughts. I swear, Jeremy, is your mind always on sex? He looked at her, his eyes practically smouldering and sending secret shivers through her whole body.
Come on. Not everyone's desires have to do with sex. Most don't. So what's hers?
I don't know. I guess not to be overshadowed by that awful sister of hers.
Bingo. And with your hat, you accomplished just that. It was a showstopper without being so over the top that it was sucking all the air out of the room. Honestly, your hat was perfect for Princess Grace, but the style would do nothing for Princess Georgina. I don't know how Finley sold her on it. She'll look fine enough, but that will be it.
He reached into his breast pocket to pull out his phone. Tapping a few times, he pulled up the offending photo once again. He was right. It wasn't up to par with her hat, and not good on Georgie at all. With her sharper features, the hat was all wrong.
Now,
Jeremy said, his voice softer now.
Take a breath. You can do this. I know you already have the answer. Just forget about the last hat. What's her personality? What would work? It's in there. You have it.
Tracy let out a breath, as she closed her eyes and let images come to her mind.
"Give me a moment to sketch something," she said, and opened her eyes again.
Tracy ignored Jeremy's grin as she set her bag on the nearest table and reached in for her sketchbook. She thought of Princess Grace's open features, her wide, expressive eyes, and how they should be shown to their best. Suddenly, she had an idea to go in an entirely different direction from the cloche style and move to something more dramatic. But how to do it without being too showy? Tracy reached back and drew inspiration from her Harlem church roots. It was May, and Princess Grace would be wearing a soft peach floral dress, so she'd keep her hat structure a light silk mesh, but go wide with the brim. The wider the better. Then do pleating in the crown and finish it off with a dramatic and sculptural sash. She quickly sketched a few variations of wide-brimmed hats inspired by the regal women she'd grown up admiring when she was a child in church on Sunday mornings. She could feel the sizzle of electricity in the air when Jeremy leaned over her shoulder.
"Those look great. Come this way. I think I have just what you need."
Tracy nodded and put any qualms she had about taking Finley's supplies aside, as Jeremy filled a shopping bag with everything she needed to make her hat.
"Please don't judge the mess,"
Jeremy said, as he went to unlock the door of his flat.
"I really didn't expect to have you stopping by my place today."
She gave him a raised brow.
"That makes two of us."
He laughed at that.
"I have a bunch of extra supplies you may need, and a large table you can work on. I'm sure it will be much more convenient than working in your hotel room."
Walking in, Tracy was immediately taken by how not him the flat was. She didn't know what she'd expected, but this wasn't it. With Jeremy's suave online persona, she guessed she'd expected him to have some type of sleek bachelor pad, leather couches that easily slid down to futons, a fireplace on a quick flick switch, and voila, ambient mood lighting. But what she was seeing before her was the exact opposite. This looked to be the home of someone's dear old granny, and it had Tracy pulled up short in confusion. She couldn't help but wonder if Jeremy was lodging here temporarily, as a pit stop on the way to the rest of his life, whatever that might be. There was a longish hallway that had offshoots to an old-fashioned, just the way your gran would like it, yellow kitchen. Across from that was another room that housed boxes and books in one corner and, Tracy was glad to see, a serger, as well as a traditional sewing machine in the other. She smiled as she turned to Jeremy.
"You weren't fooling around. You really do have all I need to work here."
He gave a half smile at that and continued leading her through the apartment. On the way, she purposefully tried to avoid looking at what had to be his bedroom, only quickly glancing at the huge bed that took up most of the small room. Going on to the living room, Tracy took in the coziness of the overstuffed couch as Jeremy offered her a seat.
"Please get comfortable. I'll get some tea going."
"You really don't have to," Tracy countered. "I probably should just get started on my work." He smiled. This time she could swear she caught a hint of nervousness.
"Well, let me at least put the kettle on."
Tracy opened her mouth to ask how she could help, but he was already on his way back down the hall. After taking off her jacket, she tried her best to get comfortable. But how could she in Jeremy's space? Being alone with him again felt both awkward and way too familiar, all at once. Letting out a long breath, she looked around. Above the fireplace was a Chagall-like floral painting, not Jeremy's style at all, and to the side, an old tea cart that held a modest-sized television. Tracy frowned. It was as if Jeremy had gotten all his furniture from a thrift sale. There was no real decorative element in the room that said anything about him or his personality, except the hat rack, mounted on the wall, showing off his collection of men's hats, which she knew he rocked from time to time to great approval in the media. Tracy moved closer to inspect it. There was a cool bowler, a pork pie, a newsboy, a fedora, and an ivy, but the standout for Tracy was the hat at the top of the rack. It both perplexed her and made her breath catch in her chest. The original rich navy was now faded to a much softer blue by time and weather. The bill was frayed, and some of the front logo embroidery was also starting to fray. But she knew instantly what it was, and couldn't believe he still had it. It was the New York Yankees cap she used to wear all the time when she'd first come to London. The one he'd taken off her head and put on his own after the first time he'd kissed her, that misty night on Primrose Hill, when she was still bright-eyed and loving London. She'd thought it was the most romantic thing in the world, the way he'd taken his newsboy cap off and traded with her, smiling that devilish smile of his. Tracy closed her eyes, shutting out the image before her and trying to escape the one in her mind. Unable to look at the hat display another moment, she turned away. Damn him for still having it, and damn her for knowing exactly where his damned newsboy cap was at this very moment, buried in a box in the back of her closet. She still didn't have the heart to throw it away. Jeremy walked back in then, mug in hand, a tentative smile on his lips.
Here you go, a little sip of fortitude for the work ahead.
Tracy quickly smiled, putting on her best mask.
Thanks. I'd better drink up so I can get going.
He nodded.
You just shout if you need help.
She nodded back, trying her best to play it cool, despite the uneasy feeling churning in her belly. She bent to put her mug of tea down on the coffee table, on top of an odd doily. She looked back up at Jeremy then, no longer able to hold out on her curiosity.
How long have you lived here? About 5 years. Why? It's just doesn't seem to be quite your style.
He looked around and laughed.
Yeah, I guess it's not, but it's fine. I'm comfortable here. It was Mrs. Brightly's old place. I had been renting a room from her for the past few years before she died.
Tracy felt her heart drop. Shit. Poor Jeremy. So Mrs. Brightly's passing must have hurt him more than he'd let on.
I'm so sorry, she said.
He smiled, a sorrowful smile full of remembrance that twisted at her heart.
Don't be. She was happy till the very end. So, yes, I know it's not my style, but I just haven't gotten around to redecorating.
He cleared the little croak that had come to his throat before continuing.
She loved this place. After she passed on, I was able to scoop it up from the landlady. I guess I'm lucky she didn't kick me out, raise the rent, and replace me with a corporate raider type.
Tracy could feel pain in his voice. She knew he had no family, so the loss of someone he'd lived with and looked up to had to have hurt him.
I really am sorry, she said again.
Then, as if on instinct, Tracy stepped forward and reached her arms around Jeremy. The hug was meant as comfort, but all it did was tie her in knots. And when she felt his arms come around her too, strong and ever so gently pulling her into his body, she just about melted from the delicious feel of him.
Wait, why was she here anyway?
Oh yeah, make her hat and get the hell out. Tracy did a quick mental 3 count and pushed back, smoothing out her top. She gave a little cough and walked around to the other side of the coffee table.
Well, I'd better get to it. This hat won't make itself.
He shook his head.
No, it won't.
Jeremy let out a long breath. For all his nervousness, things weren't going half bad. All right, so maybe it was all pretty bad, but you couldn't call it downright awful. This whole thing could have blown up in his face back at the palace. As it was, he'd made it all the way back to his flat with Tracy. So what if she had been completely pissed at him? She was still here, and she was still getting a redo on making her hat. Though she seemed worried about how it would turn out, Jeremy was confident it would end up fantastic. If there was one thing he never doubted, it was Tracy's talent. As for the rest, the relationship and where it would end up after tonight, of that he had no idea. But he knew one thing was for sure. As soon as he'd heard she was back in his city, he knew he had to at least try to make up for how he'd wronged her all those years ago. He'd been young and stupid, and most of all a scared, poor-as-hell kid. How could he have let her gamble her dream on a nobody like him from Camden without 2 quid to his name? No, he couldn't do it. Better to let her down quickly back then. He thought of her now, gorgeous, self-assured, determined, but still with that same spark, and part of him knew he'd made the right decision, even if it had hurt her and just about gutted him. He shook his head. So what was he doing? How was he any more deserving of her now? What made him think he could dare ask for another chance? Jeremy shuffled a few boxes around in the spare room before lifting the portable sewing machine to carry it into the living room. He sucked in a deep breath, let it out slowly for courage, and once again turned to walk down the hall toward the only woman he'd ever truly loved.
Tracy. The only thing to mark the hours that had flown by was the now nearly complete hat in Tracy's hands and the sound of the steadily pouring rain outside the darkened windows. Tracy blinked her dry eyes and gave herself a mental high five. She'd done good. Better than good. Great, given the circumstances. Despite her design being plagiarized and her brand possibly robbed of her biggest break ever, then blindsided and stuck working in the flat of the man who'd broken her heart, she was doing the damned thing. Tracy held up the hat in her slightly aching hands and took a moment to admire it. She wasn't one to go in for self-praise, but this one seemed even better than her original idea. The delicate, structured pleating of the mesh was lovely. The high-low effect of the feathers was unexpected and would be as striking on Princess Gracie as it would be unexpectedly flirty. Tracy sighed as she added a final feather and looked at it one last time. That was only if all went to plan and the princess actually wore the hat. She looked around then, once again becoming truly aware of her surroundings. She vaguely remembered Jeremy slipping in and refilling her tea some time ago, dropping off cookies or some such things she didn't remember eating, but must have, because there was an empty plate with crumbs on the table. So Jeremy had stayed true to his word. She couldn't help being surprised, but her surprise quickly faded as she sniffed the air and caught a whiff of something delicious. As if on cue, Jeremy entered the living room, looking like the sexiest man alive, with an old-fashioned apron around his waist and a plate in each hand.
"That looks amazing,"
he said.
"Are you hungry?"
"Thank you, and I'm starving," she replied, then placed the hat down on the table. "Is that bacon I smell? Are you trying to seduce me?" He grinned as he set the plates down on the coffee table in front of the couch and looked her in the eye.
"Would you hate me if I said yes?"
Tracy paused and stared at him, searching for any hint of playfulness. Finding none, she decided to laugh it off. As if anyone could ever find fault when it comes to bacon. She joined him on the couch and picked up the sandwich he'd made, taking a healthy bite. "This is delicious," she said, eager to be off the subject of seduction. She smiled warmly at him instead. "Yum. Grilled cheese is my favorite."
"I remember,"
he replied, causing the cheese to glue up in her mouth, making it hard to swallow.
"And you'll remember over here. It's called cheese on toast."
Tracy nodded and coughed, reaching for the water bottle on the table. feeling quite like toast herself at the moment. When she looked back at Jeremy and caught the hint of what could have been desire, or dare she think, something deeper, all thoughts of cheese, bacon, and toast faded. What did hating him have to do with wanting him? And right now, she really did want him. Despite the fact that she was still angry over how he'd treated her all those years ago. He'd helped her tonight. And as for tomorrow, well, that was tomorrow. Her heart was racing right now. Tracy took a breath and leaned in closer to Jeremy, almost laughing at his immediate shock. You know what? Suddenly, I'm not quite as hungry as I thought. He blinked, lashes fluttering, eyes widening, and it was just about the cutest thing ever.
You mean to tell me I went to all that trouble for nothing?
Tracy shook her head, then moved closer still, tipping her tongue out, gently swiping at his lips. The taste was so delicious, it tingled her to her core. She tried her hardest to still her heart against emotions she wasn't ready for.
Oh, you'll be rewarded for all your hard work.
She leaned up and over and straddled his lap. Coming to meet him face to face, Tracy got an intense thrill, finding him already excited under her. She leaned forward again, to bring her lips to his once more, as he brought both hands around her, cupping her behind. Greatly rewarded. But Jeremy stilled her then, bringing his hand up between the two of them, a question in his eyes.
Are you sure about this?
She nodded. Absolutely. He gave her a sheepish grin, his cheeks reddening.
Well, then you're not going to believe this. But I'm going to have to pop out for a moment to the shop for some protection.
When Tracy's brows pulled together, he began to quickly explain.
Despite what you may think of me, I'm not the ladies' man I play on social media, and I don't bring women back to my flat.
He gave a sigh and lifted her off his lap, as if she was as light as one of the feathers on her hat. I will not regret this. I will not regret this. Tracy put the tune on repeat as she looked out the window at the steady rain and waited for Jeremy to return from the store. He really was taking quite a while, and she hoped he wasn't regretting the idea of being with her, if even for the night. Turning away, she looked down at the hat box where she'd now packed the new design away ready to be delivered in the morning. She felt a moment of unease. It was quite late, but maybe she should call Jeremy. Tell him they should take a rain check and deliver the hat tonight. The idea of waiting until the morning felt like cutting it too close. She sighed, shaking her head. She didn't even have his number. Just then, she heard a buzz and looked around, spotting Jeremy's phone peeking out from under the couch's side pillow. Fancy that. He'd forgotten it anyway. Maybe that was him calling from a payphone. Tracy reached to pick up the phone and saw a text appear on the screen from someone named Gwen Parker. Thanks again for the tip, Ari, Princess G's fitting at Nice Studio. It's getting great traction on Style Journal. You really came through. XXXOOOG. Shit. Letting out a breath, she ripped a sheet of paper from her sketchbook. She quickly drew a head with a hat, the top shape an exaggerated heart, jagged through the middle and falling over. She signed it. Thanks for the memories, and check your texts. Your friend Gwen is quite appreciative. Tracy refreshed her lipstick, kissed the page, and then placed both the sketch and the phone in the center of the table, before turning toward the door of the apartment. Before she left, though, she stepped back in and grabbed her old baseball cap off the rack and shoved it into her purse, eager now to get out and away before Jeremy returned.
Jeremy. The silence of his apartment had never bothered Jeremy before, but as soon as he opened the door, he'd immediately known something was wrong. Finding his cell and her note with that soul-crushing sketch was devastating, but when he saw his hat was gone, he knew he was sunk. He loved that stupid hat, cherished the damn thing. It was the only piece of her he could still call his during all these years apart. Jeremy sighed. He couldn't blame her, though. Of course she'd think the worst of him after seeing a text like the one he'd received from Gwen. Shit. He had to make her understand why he had done it. He was currently in a cab, racing to the palace. His first stop, stupidly, had been Primrose Hill, the site of their first kiss. But it was closed. And why would she be there in the rain anyway? The last thing she'd want to do right now was reminisce about their good times. So his last resort was the palace. All he could think was that she must have gone there to deliver the hat tonight. It would be just like her not to be able to wait. Pulling up and paying his ridiculously large fare, Jeremy's heart did a complete 180 when he saw Tracy exiting the side visitor's door. She looked beautiful and determined as she strode toward him, umbrella raised so that her face was slightly shadowed, but there was still no hiding the fire in her eyes. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone clipped. "You do realize you're getting soaked." "Am I? Oh, hell. I must have left my umbrella in the cab. What does it matter?" Jeremy shrugged. "How'd it go? Did your design go over well?" "Might as well start with that." "She loved it. I was lucky she even answered my request to be seen so late at night," Tracy said without emotion. Her cold words practically broke him. He knew this was a big moment for her, or at least should have been. He hated taking away any of that joy. Jeremy attempted a smile. "That's wonderful. She'll be wearing your design. This is the break you've been waiting for." He reached out to take her hand, and she took a quick step back. "How do you know what I've been waiting for? And what the hell do you care? You can stop the act now, or would you like my phone so you can forward a photo of the new hat to your pal Gwen?" Jeremy let out a breath. "I'm sorry. I should explain." She shot him a glare. "You think?" Then she shook her head. "No, I don't think. I honestly don't care. You weren't trustworthy then and you aren't now. I don't need to hear what you have to say." She started to walk away, but once again Jeremy stepped in front of her. "I know I don't have a right to ask, but will you please listen? Yes, I helped get the photo leaked, but I didn't have anything to do with the design. When I saw it, I knew instantly it was one of yours. I knew I had to find a way to finally take Finley down. He was going to publicly burn you again. If Grace had worn your original hat to the wedding, everyone would have thought you were the plagiarist. I could not let that happen. This way I thought he would be outed and you would be saved." He paused. "I didn't expect that you'd be here with no other designs and no sewing equipment, though I should have thought of the sewing equipment since you were traveling from the States. I know, it all almost blew up in both of our faces." He watched as she did some mental calculations. Her expression softened and then hardened again. She pushed at his soaked chest. "Both? No, it was me who was almost ruined. You were on the sidelines, like always. I know this looks bad, and I'm sorry, but it would have been worse any other way, Tracy. Please, trust me." Her eyes went almost impossibly dark before she spoke next. "Screw you, Jeremy Brooks. I don't need you to save me." She turned and started to walk away again. Suddenly Jeremy couldn't breathe. He watched her get farther and farther away, almost out of sight, before he ran. Surprised at his desperation, he was almost out of breath when he was once again in front of her, pushing rain-drenched hair from his eyes. "Well, maybe I need you to save me," he said, barely able to get the words out quickly enough. "What?" "I said I know you don't need me to save you, but maybe I need you to save me. I can't do this anymore. Listen, I know I screwed up, but please give me a chance. I can't let you go again." She shook her head, but her features had shifted from angry to sad. "My life is in New York, Jeremy." He nodded. "I get that. but know that I never stopped loving or believing in you, Tracy. If you're in New York, then my heart's in New York." He watched as she blinked, and for a moment, he thought it could just be the rain in her eyes. But no, tears were definitely flowing. She nodded and smiled. Those dimples he'd been longing to see from her all day finally appeared as she gave him a true, sincere smile, one that showed a glimpse of her heart. It practically made his heart burst. She stepped forward, covering his now completely rain-soaked body with her umbrella. "Okay, then. Let's see how you do in the Big Apple." Jeremy felt all the tension melt from his body. He leaned forward and took her in his arms once again. All he wanted in that moment was to kiss this woman until they both forgot their past and present, and all they could consider was a future together. But then she held up a free hand, bringing reality into focus again. She smiled. "Don't screw it up." He nodded and grinned. "Oh, love, I won't." He leaned in to kiss her then, all his focus on those gorgeous full lips of hers. But then he paused. Pulling back, he looked her deep in the eyes. "But tell me this, while I'm on probation, can I at least have my baseball cap back?"
You're listening to Royally Yours by K.M. Jackson, starring Lorna Bennett and Gary Furlong. Produced by Realm, your portal to another world. Realm, listen away. Royally Yours is created by Megan Frampton and written by Megan Frampton, K.M. Jackson, Falguni Kothari, Liz Maverick, and Kat McMurray. It is produced by Lydia Shama and executive produced by Julian Yap and Molly Barton. Audio production, sound design, editing, and theme music by Amanda Rose Smith.